always brings.
Really? That's good.
Peanut one, do the recipes on
We'll do some like Chick-fil-A chicken nuggets or something.
We're going to go through the effort of going to the drive-thru.
That's great.
I thought Wes was gonna make steak for everybody.
Wes, walk up here, don't hold my foot out. Chicken nuggets are good.
I thought she was gonna cook steaks for everybody.
You're being
I don't know
hard
where you
on
got that
her.
from.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
Am I
There's
being
nothing wrong with Chick-fil-A nuggets.
For steak.
No, steak's better. That's better.
That would work.
That's funny. She has her own way of picking on me, you know. You guys just don't see. She's a lot more subtle about it, you know. Mine's like an out loud thing where she's just over there picking on me nonstop.
I don't believe it.
All right. Well, anything exciting happened this week? Moving on. Anyway,
You really wanna
okay.
go there?
I don't even want to discuss that really. All right, things working.
In the woods. Branson and Clyde. And
Oh, yeah, they're gone.
yeah.
It's a lot different without Branson up there. Is it a lot different for you? It's a lot different. Like the
So we don't have the bass or the drums today?
bass
I
or
can
drum.
help out. I mean,
She got the tambourine.
We got the tambourine going. That's true.
I want one of those little shakers.
Yeah, you can just get some salt or something.
That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm
You don't have to get a
surely I can
fancy
do
one.
that.
Yeah.
Easter egg and
There you go.
beans or
Beans.
something.
I thought Rachel was gonna play the drums. Maybe.
I'll give you take care of those. Who's got you covered?
He plays a little bit.
She has before.
Does he have his own drums?
No.
No.
Does he need some?
No.
He probably does
I bet
need
he
some.
does.
Christy does.
Yeah, some.
Some little kid ones? Yeah.
I told you you need to bring them to your house.
It's funny, you know, when you buy those things, like even like those first act ones or whatever those, yeah, you think
The
those things are
$20
gonna,
ones from Walmart.
yeah, those
No,
things last forever.
100
And they're gonna make
years.
noise for the rest of your
Pretty
life,
sure
so.
Graysons are still being beat on somewhere.
Uh-huh. So if your brothers or sisters have kids, that's an excellent thing to get their kids, you know? Just saying. That's pretty funny.
Really
Anything-
don't like them.
Anything that, yeah, that's right, anything that makes a lot of noise. But anyway, all right, so we got the book done, we're ready. All right, so today we are, we're back doing ancient relationships. We're moving on in the book of Genesis today. Our previous weeks we've been talking about Adam and Eve and creation, and we discussed the different relationships. We discussed, God and creation, God and Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve themselves had their own relationship, of course, and Adam to creation. We talked about, how we're focusing on some literary qualities. Make sure that she gets the cook back there coming in. We're focusing on the literary qualities. Maybe some details that we've missed before. It's just so rich with details. Maybe we can shed some light on different things. And we're looking at those different relationships and then the crossover of those relationships, or the intersection where they meet between God and human beings, and then human beings, and how that affects each other. I thought it might be fun. You don't really have to. Oh, this thing's froze up for sure.
Are you live?
Yes, I think so. It's okay. Is it not live?
I haven't got them.
I'll be in the wrong group.
But I haven't.
Oh, you? I have.
I think so.
Very good.
So, I'm the only one who watches that anyway. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you're not.
That's pretty funny. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, I'm just waiting myself. Anyway,
If he were only that was awesome.
yeah, I just saw myself wave just then. That's funny. Yeah.
And it's like 5 times you watch it a week.
No, it's every single time she's running her mouth at night. I just put that on, and she goes right to sleep. All right, so moving on. No, just kidding. Here we go. It's like, here he goes again.
He's just digging it.
Yeah, no.
He's asking for it.
That was kind of cut down myself, I felt like. But anyway, okay, I don't know.
You might want to fix your own food today.
I get that feeling a lot, you know.
But you still don't do it.
No. What Keelan's on me today. All right. So a couple of review points from the last couple weeks. If you know the answer, yell it out loud. If not, I'll give you like a second half, and I'll just say it to myself and not drag it out. But anyway, so a few things that we learned. In Hebrew, Adam means man. That's right. It also means from the soil. Man from the soil. That's exactly right. That's good. Points. Adam's duties were
Nothing. I'm
I
sorry.
know.
Naming animals.
The
Name
land,
land, that's true.
What's that, till?
yes.
The land.
Oh my goodness! I'll tell you, we're just going to quit with the review.
It's a star.
It was to till and watch, and another way we looked at it was to serve or guard the earth. That's exactly right. And Adam's naming of the animals signifies his participation in the act of creation. The first thing that God sees that is not good was
It was alone.
Adam's loneliness. That's exactly right. Okay. So, anyway, Adam's able to identify himself as Ish only after
They named the woman.
After he names the woman. That's a man. Lacey's paying attention. That's what I'm talking about. After he names Eve, Ish and Isha. That's the man and woman. It describes the relationship between the man and woman. It comes up several times. When confronting Eve, the serpent, he tells both a truth and a lie at the same time. I don't know how to answer that question. But the purpose of God questioning Adam and Eve was to provide a call for repentance, to give them a chance to repent for what they had done. And Adam's response to God's questions after eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil signifies a rupture to both the human and the God-to-human relationships. And the last one, God's expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden should be seen as an act of mercy. That's a pretty good one. So we're going to be in Genesis this morning. We are going to be in Genesis 15. We're going to skip all over the place to some degree. Not really skip, but we're going to fast forward as we go along. We'll be going from 15 to 21. So we're just going to read some select passages in each one. And a couple things we want to keep in mind that we've discussed is how man is distinct from every other creation. Man is the mediator. He is standing there at this position, in between the heavenly and the material. He has these divine qualities and simultaneously the earthly qualities. And it's the tension between the two that we have our conflict. You can just keep filling in things, LaShawn. Once you've wrote one thing, you can just keep that. Which brings us to our study today, which really shows the rivalry and the pain that start to appear as humans struggle with these divine promises. In spite of their failings, God remains faithful to his covenant and responds to suffering and to mankind. Today we're going to look at Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And we'll start working a little bit into next week, which is Abraham and Isaac, which is one of my favorites. But we're going to start in chapter 15 because most of the Abraham and Sarah story is rooted in childbirth. And will he have a male heir? Those are kind of the things that are going on right now at this time. We'll pick up right there in verse 2, where it says. Oh, and one other thing is this translation that I have is based on the Hebrew Bible. It's going to be a little bit different than yours. It's kind of like you go to your uncle's church and they read out of the wrong Bible to some degree. So the whole time, some of the words may be a little bit different, but maybe the way in which they interpret it could give you a different perspective on things. I think that's a good way to look at it. And verse 2, Abraham says to God, "O my master, Lord, what can you give me when I'm going to my end childless?" What can you give me? Yeah. What can you give me when I'm going to my end childless? And the steward of my household is Damascus Eleazar. And Abraham said, "Look, to me you have given no seed, and here a member of my household is to be my heir." And now the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This one will not be your heir, but he who issues from your loins will be your heir." And he took him outside, and he said, "Look up to the heavens and count the stars, if you can count them." And he said, "So shall be your seed." And he trusted in the Lord, and God reckoned it to his merit. So, the reason we start here is to put this in our minds first. This one brief moment of Abraham's desire is to have a son, to have an heir, and he's begging God for this. And in this part here in verse 2, he says, I'm going to my grave childless, and all I've got Demasek Eleazar going to be my heir. And of course, to me, the first thing I say is, man, what a precise name of this guy. Like, who is this? Why do we not know who this is? But his name just basically means Eleazar from Damascus is another way of looking at it. But he's also listed as a slave that's born into my house. It's talked about. They talk about him all through Genesis. He's a servant who's probably the oldest of the house. He's in charge of all that Abraham had. He calls him the steward of his household. But later on, we'll see him next week, because he's the one who Abraham sends out to find Isaac's wife. The story of where he sends out his servant that represents his house. That's the same guy. And so he's saying, all I have to pass on my things to is my best servant to some degree. And of course, at that point, I would say, like, well, whatever happened to Lot? Why wouldn't you give him? But I guess, he's just talking about his direct household, I guess. And then the next verse says, right there in 3, it says, and Abraham said, which is very interesting, because he spoke right before that. So when a character speaks a line, and then the text has the character speaking another line, and Abraham said, that means that God gave no response. So he asked the question, am I going to be without an heir? Is this going to be fulfilled through a line that is not completely my own? So when he speaks a second time, God gave him no answer. We'll find that a couple times today, where somebody speaks, there's silence, and then they speak again. I think that's pretty interesting. Abraham, he's trying to get an answer. He's pushing here. He's, look to me, you have given me no seed. And then finally God responds. We need to see this as an urgent situation for Abraham. He's getting older. He's like, why have you done this? And it also sets up what we have going on in chapter 16, and the way Abraham and Sarah take the situation into their own hands. This is the only thing we can do. God's not going to do this for us. We're going to have to do this ourselves. So we're going to pay attention to how much information is given here in just a few lines. So in chapter 16, it says, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had bore him no children, and she had an Egyptian slave girl named Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, look, pray, the Lord has kept me from bearing children. Pray, come to bed with my slave girl. Perhaps I shall be built up through her. And Abraham heeded the voice of Sarah, and Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, after Abraham had dwelled 10 years in the land of Canaan. And she gave her to Abraham, her husband, as a wife. And he came to bed with Hagar, and she conceived. And she saw that she had conceived, and her mistress seemed slight in her eyes. And Sarah said to Abraham, this outrage against me is because of you. I myself put my slave girl in your embrace, and when she saw she had conceived, I became slight in her eyes. Let the Lord judge between you and me. So we'll stop there and go through all the details, but I know what we're all thinking, man, this is your best plan? Like, I know you probably didn't think you had many options, but man, this had to have been like plan F or plan G or something, like you couldn't, maybe adoption? No, I don't know. There had to have been other options there. But that's their plan. So we'll see how that works. But sometimes when we read biblical literature, it can seem unnecessarily repetitive. Some of the parts that we just read over and over have the same words, and sometimes we look at it like a flaw, or they're trying to be very basic, but it's actually one of the features of the text, and it's doing that on purpose. Through repetition, it's trying to tell us the details in the story. It's highlighting what's important. So when we look at verse 2, it says, pray, come to bed with my slave girl. So the scene is set up, Sarah the wife, Hagar the Egyptian slave girl. Perhaps I will be built up through her. And then the next sentence, and Abraham heeded the voice of Sarah, and Sarah, Abraham's wife. So what they're doing there is, in case you've forgotten, Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl.
Can we just say poor Hagar here?
You feel like she is innocent in this. I've read many different people's views, especially modern views, where, they see her as a slave girl and they see her as having no choice, and
She has no choice.
she's just stuck in this,
Yes.
That's very interesting. Yeah, no, it's good. That's one way of looking at it for sure. I will say though, she does end up better off in the end to some degree.
Whatever. I mean.
To some degree, I mean, her son will have nations of,
I know what you're
generations.
saying.
I know what you're saying
Part
too.
of the
Yeah.
whole story.
Mhm.
Yes, it is. You're right. But
Right, you're right. No, it is.
her
But it
plan.
wasn't
It
her
doesn't
plan.
appear as if she's in on the plan.
No.
We don't
I
have that
think so.
dialogue. That is very true. Yeah.
Right.
And as a slave
And
girl,
I see what you're saying.
what part
I
would
mean,
she
I
have?
know.
Many people go even further than that. And we're way off subject here,
Oh, really?
but many people will say as a slave she was to some degree raped
She
even,
was.
because she but then you're seeing Abraham and Sarah as,
She consented to it, really. I mean,
We don't know if she did. We don't know.
We
if
don't
she
know.
consi- She,
We
did,
don't
she
know.
had no choice as a slave girl.
she could have been like, "Psst, I got an idea." I don't know. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it was her
that's
initial plan.
true. Like, she
I don't
could
know.
have been saying, "I'm okay with that, Sarah. Let's do this."
Um,
but
Maybe one night at dinner, Abraham's like,
I mean, he was
I got a
like
plan,
100,
guys.
you know. How was he?
Somebody stop that thing. Anyway, moving on. So it's re-emphasizing their relationships. It'll say, Sarah, Abraham's wife, Hagar, the Egyptian slave girl, showing us their roles, and then disaster follows. She gave her to Abraham, her husband, as a wife. Most English translations, most of your Bibles will use the word concubine. But in this, and of course, like we learned last week, Isha, meaning woman, or also wife, is the word that's used here. So when they use it in this translation, they use the word wife. So gave her to him as a wife, which really kind of changes the whole relationship to some degree. So we see this is going to be a disaster. But the text has set up this hierarchy. Before that, we have Sarah the wife and Hagar the Egyptian slave girl. And clearly there's a distinction between the two.
did he not have other wives?
I don't know.
think so.
I mean, I don't think so.
I don't think it was.
That's a good question.
A lot of them. They haven't mentioned it.
Right. Not Abraham.
Was there like
I
a
see what
whole,
you're
like a whole ceremony where he became her husband, or?
That's a great question, I think.
Was it just like a?
We're just going to say, write it up. I don't know.
No, I think it was rape.
Hey.
I'm
Sorry, we're having trouble playing this video.
good.
I don't know. Maybe it's still working
That
though.
saved me.
If somebody's on there, see if it's still working. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
she made a good point. Concubine, ceremony.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
weird.
But what we're seeing is before this, there's a clear distinction between Sarah and Hagar.
Right.
And what happens? She gave her to Abraham, her husband, as a wife, and now Sarah and Hagar are equals. Which
But
is
as a slave, you don't have very many choices anyway. So
Yeah,
you
right.
have to do it.
you'd have to do it to some degree, right? Even if it's not your plan, right?
She did flee though. Why can't she flee before it?
There you go. That's good.
What did
Keelan
you
on the
say?
defense there. He said, why didn't she just, she flees. Why doesn't she just flee before this happens?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I don't know.
It would change her whole life if you think about it. Too. I mean, it kind of
Everything.
you aren't a slave anymore.
Yeah, you're saying it benefits her.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah,
does
yeah.
benefit her. In
Yeah.
the end, it
That's your
benefits her.
point. Yeah. It does.
But what if
I
she
get
was
that.
scared in the beginning?
I'm sure she was.
I don't know. That's a good
Anyway.
question. I mean, maybe they were all friends and ate at the same table. I don't know. How many slaves does he have? We know he's got Eleazar. We know he's got Hagar. How many does he not name? I don't know. He was very rich at this
As a woman,
point.
you start out scared and then you get that eagerness inside of you and then you do flee. And that's probably what she did.
Mhm.
Did you do for
Yeah, then you do flee when you're tired of all that stuff.
But anyway, so what that does is it's going to set up a rivalry between the two. And then it gets worse. He comes to bed with Hagar, and she conceived, and she saw that she had conceived, and her mistress seemed slight in her eyes. So now, what has Hagar added to it? She's not just Abraham's wife, she's also the mother of his child.
Make her a little above her.
A little bit. Unarguably to some degree, his whole want at this point, what he's crying out to God for is an heir. And then Hagar, she gives him that. And Sarah's not,
But if that's not what Sarah wanted, then why did she set it up?
She didn't think about it.
I
And-
mean, she was woman.
It seems like it's her suggestion. You know, it seems like it's Sarah's plan. You know, I don't know.
What's Sarah's plan?
Like
She
my-
regretted it.
By being with Hagar, he's gonna be more fertile when he comes back to her.
I don't know. That's a good question. The one thing,
Yeah.
the one thing we have to keep in mind is they're both old already. Like we don't have their exact age at this point, but they're old. You know,
I said, poor Hagar.
they're like Scott McCarley old. You know what I'm saying? They are old. You know, and
Is Hagar old too?
No.
I don't think so. I think Hagar's
So either.
Hagar's young. I would guess.
This is bad planning.
This is a bad plan.
Poor planning.
This is absolutely terrible.
She just had like
100%.
she just thought she,
Impulsive
an
moment.
impulsive, yeah. I know, we can fix this, and then all of a sudden she's feeling jealous and sad.
Mhm. It's
Don't
true.
you think?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. The whole hierarchy though is disrupted, and it's going to lead to rivalry and also to violence. In verse 6, we'll pick up there. It says, "Let the Lord judge between you and me." And Abraham said to Sarah, "Look, your slave girl is in your hands. Do to her whatever you think is right." And then we think, well, what is Abraham doing here? He's passing all of his responsibility that he has to Hagar, the mother of his child, who he should be kind of, stepping up for, I would say. And he's handing it all over to Sarah. And that's definitely one way to understand it. You know, he's backing off. He's like, hey, whatever you want to do. But should he be stepping up saying, you can't get rid of the mother of my child? You know, that's kind of the language that we would think he would be using there. But either way, that's not going to end well. So what is he doing here? He's just trying to put back the original relationship of Sarah and Hagar, you know? He's putting it back on Sarah. Look, she's your slave girl. She's your deal. She's, you do what you want. Yeah. I don't have anything to do with this. Whatever you say, good or bad, it's up to you. And then he backs off. And then Sarah harasses her, and she fled from her. Sarah wants her gone, the mother of his child or not. She feels slighted in her eyes. I became slight in her eyes is this translation. Many other translations read despised in her sight. Or another one I like is she began to treat her with contempt. So you can just see, she feels like she's got something up on her. Maybe it's maybe she does have a place at that table now to where she used to have to sit at the other table, and every single time she looks at her, she kind of looks at her a little, with contempt, Yeah, the smirk. That's good. That's true. That's very good. And the Lord's messenger found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. And we're going to remember that, the spring of water part, because the next time she flees, we find her beside a spring of water again. But verse 7 says, "And the Lord's messenger found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring of water on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave girl of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going?" So the messenger reapplies the relationship here. Hagar, slave girl of Sarah. The angel says, this can work. You just have to remember your role to some degree. Where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, "From Sarah, my mistress, I'm fleeing." And she responds and reinserts the original hierarchy. In verse 9, "And the Lord's messenger said to her, Return to your mistress and suffer abuse at her hand. And the Lord's messenger said to her, I will surely multiply your seed, and it will be beyond all counting." And the messenger speaks to her, and then there's a silence, and then he speaks to her again. Hagar didn't like what he said, return and suffer abuse, and she's quiet. And basically, it's, "I have heard your suffering, now go and suffer," which is that's quite a statement. I'm gonna say, I've heard your suffering, now go suffer. So if you want a line that encapsulates the whole Hebrew Bible to some degree, that is the line. "I've heard your suffering, now go suffer." He says to Hagar, and then he makes a promise. And we see this again and again and again in God's language with Abraham, the multiplication of his heirs, greater than the stars, greater than the heavens, greater than the sand of the desert. And then in verse 11, "And the Lord's messenger said to her, Look, you have conceived and will bear a son, and you will call his name Ishmael." And here's the line. "And the Lord has heeded your suffering." For the Lord has heeded your suffering. Now go back and suffer. So now we shift the narrative back to Abraham and Sarah. We know that Hagar returns, and Ishmael will be the father of countless generations. One good question there for me is, where's Ishmael in this scene? Did she flee without him, and did she leave him there? You know, that's a pretty good question, you know. Maybe feeling like she didn't have the right to take him, or is he with her? Why did we not mention him with her? I think that's one of my good questions in this scene.
In 11, the angel of the Lord says to her, "You are pregnant and shall bear
Oh.
a son."
I thought
So
she had
she's
a
still
hand.
pregnant.
Okay. Well, that explains it then. Anyway, okay.
I just saw that.
So, okay, no, that's good. That's good. In 15 there, and God said, oh, hold on. You were in chapter 17 now. I'm sorry. Chapter 17, verse 15. That's my problem. I'm skipping ahead too much. And God said to Abraham, Sarah, your wife shall no longer be called by her name. And of course, it's Sarai at that point, but I'm just saying Sarah just to simplify it. For Sarah is her name. And I will bless her. And I will also give you from her a son, and I will bless him. And she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall issue from her. And Abraham flung himself on his face, and he laughed, saying to himself, to 100-year-old will a child be born? Will 90-year-old Sarah give birth? And that's one of the lines we're going to concentrate as we keep going on right there. You know, and is that line right there. And now we get to the story of Isaac. Isaac is the Hebrew word ikshak, and it just means laughter. It's just a very common word for, you know, people laughing. You know, they were all laughing. They were all Isaac to some degree. The rivalry between Sarah and Hagar, the relationship between Sarah and her son Isaac, and between Sarah and Abraham are all based on this one image of laughter from this point on. So we ask ourselves, you know, why is he laughing? I think that's good. Jewish and Christian traditions would tell you that it's a laughter of joy. He is laughing out of the joy of his heart, you know. This is something that Abraham desires, you know. But there's a scholarly tradition which I really like, and we're going to stick it in here, which is much more of a laughter of disbelief. You know, he's much more skeptical with this, and that's, you know, not saying anything against the way it is traditionally learned, and especially like when we go to Hebrews 11, we talk about the faith of Abraham. You know, this is a joy of laughter, you know, laughter of joy to some degree. But for me, there's at least a level of disbelief in there, and you know, maybe scorn, you know, maybe at some level skepticism. You know, is he laughing because he doesn't believe that God can do this? You know, I don't know. And I don't want us to answer that in your head yet. I just kind of hold on to that, and we'll keep reading. We'll see if the text answers itself. At least, you know, is this a laughter of joy, or at least some level of skepticism? And we'll just hold on to that as we go into verse 18. And Abraham said to God, would that Ishmael might live in your favor? So how do we understand that if we're holding on to the tension between the two, it's either skepticism or joy? If it's skeptical, he could be saying, now we've already got Ishmael, why can't we just make a great nation out of him? You know, whatever plans you have for this new son, let's just apply that to Ishmael, and you know, we'll be fine. But if it's a laughter of joy, maybe he says it as, I have a beloved son Ishmael. Please don't forget about, you know, my beloved older son Ishmael. That Ishmael might live in your favor, and so now I have two sons. Please don't forget about Ishmael. The reading works both ways there, and it does in many parts as we go down through here. In verse 19 it says, and God said, yet Sarah your wife is to bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Look, I will bless him and make him fruitful and will multiply him most abundantly. 12 chieftains he shall beget, and I will make him a great nation. So God responds, and it works with both readings. Skeptical. Look, I know you're skeptical. You're worried about Ishmael. Look, I will give you a line through Sarah. And if it's the one of joy, look, I hear that you have two sons that you love. And don't worry, I won't forget about Ishmael. So now it's time to return to Sarah with this news and to finish the promise of the blessings to come. So in chapter 18, we pick up with the messengers, the angels who've come to visit them in verse 10. And they said to him, where is Sarah your wife? He said, there, in the tent. And he said, I will surely return to you at this very season, and look, a son shall Sarah your wife have. And Sarah was listening at the tent flap, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah no longer had her woman's flow. And Sarah laughed inwardly, saying, after being shriveled, shall I have pleasure, and my husband is old? And the Lord said to Abraham, why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, shall I really give birth, old as I am? Is there anything beyond the Lord? In due time I will return to you at this very season, and Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah dissembled, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, yes, you did laugh. So there's all kinds of stuff going on here. Yeah. Whew. It's and you know, one thing I really like about the language here is it's kind of it's not rough. Yeah, it is kind of rough. It's kind of, the language right here is a little bit rough. You know, it's not very polished, which I kind of like. I feel like that's, you know, probably exactly what they said. You know, God responds to her response. So the last section here mirrors Abraham's laugh story. She hears that she's going to bear a son, which she realizes is biologically impossible. Sarah no longer had the woman's flow, is the way it's described here. Abraham had the same response, whether it's the skeptical understanding or the joyful one. If it's the skeptical, how is this possible? If it's the joyful, you know, it's a great expression of faith in God. But Sarah laughed inwardly. And most all exegetes see this as cynical, skeptical. And my husband is old. Here, most all commentaries see this as a laughter of scorn or skepticism that will be turned into laughter of joy. I think we all agree on that. You know, as soon as we hear that, we see her as, now come on now, you know.
Because then she turned around and denied it. So
That's exactly, that's even
it was
making her
shameful.
more,
It-
right.
it-
And then once we see that, we're seeing that at that point, it probably was her plan in the first place. But no, yes, that's true. No, she was scared. I mean, you know.
You're 86, you're going to be scared.
I mean, if you were, but who wouldn't laugh at 86?
I agree.
We all would laugh.
We would all laugh at 60 to some degree, unless it can be proven to us in some way. You know,
We all would laugh.
we're far more skeptical, I think, now than they would have been back then. But
But how many years are they living at this time though?
A long time.
86
Okay, but
then
still-
is
Okay.
equivalent to.
Still
no, that's a good
But
question.
yeah, she was still past. It says she was old and not even able to have kids.
That's a good
So-
question. It's similar to ours, but not quite ours. So let's just say 120 would be like the we're past Noah, we're past all that. So they are old. You know, they might be more like 80. You know, like ish. You know, for our deterioration of our bodies or whatever the right words would be.
It baffles me. I mean, these people have like a direct or semi-direct line to God, but her having
Somewhat
a
direct.
child at 90 is what makes
Yeah,
her
right.
laugh. I'm like,
God just spoke to
talking
you.
to God.
What else do you need? That's good. No, I agree. You see these scenes that you're in here, Sarah? Anyway, yeah, right. No, I agree with that. That's good. And then we'll move down, and it says, and the Lord said to Abraham, why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, shall I really give birth old as I am? Is anything beyond the Lord? So if Abraham's skeptical, then God is asking, Abraham, please tell me why Sarah laughed. Because you too laughed when I told you 100-year Abraham and 90-year-old Sarah would have a son. And he's actually responding to Abraham's skepticism. If it's joyful, Abraham, God is saying, you don't have to go to your wife and convince her. Why does she not believe me, Abraham? Is anything beyond the Lord? Please go tell her that I'm a God of promises. I can make all these things happen. And then she says, I didn't laugh. Yes, you did. So who was at that scene for you is a good question. You know, is it skeptical Sarah and skeptical Abraham? I mean, it really doesn't matter, but in the end, it's going to take a great leap of faith in God to make this happen. Which means skeptical Abraham and skeptical Sarah are going to look at each other and say, this is great. God is going to give us a son. I wonder in which way he's going to do that. Of course, you know, we know that they're going to have to consummate the relationship, you know. But the two skeptics that they are, you know, in this joyful, you know, somewhat absurd moment to them, they realize they're going to have to participate, you know, for the promise of the blessing to come. Or, if they're joyful, then he has to convince his skeptical wife to participate in order for them to have a son. In order for this to happen, they're going to have to overcome some level of skepticism in some way to make God's promise come true. And of course they do. But I really like that scene where it hits them that they're going to have to be participants in this, consummation. And I can just see, exactly, like they just start smiling, or something. Anyway, so moving on. Down to chapter 21, verse 1, it says, "And the Lord singled out Sarah, as he had said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the set time that God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised Isaac his son when he was 8 days old, as God had charged him. And Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac his son was born to him. And Sarah said, Laughter has God made me. Whoever hears it will laugh at me." Now, most of your translations right there will say, whoever hears will laugh with me or laugh for me. And the Hebrew allows for all of these. I like his words, whoever hears will laugh at me. The translation makes me think that, she's still skeptical. Or she still sees herself as an absurd figure to some degree. And we can also read it, whoever laughs can laugh with me, Is it joyful laughter? The line reads, laughter has God made me. Isaac has God made me, is exactly what it says, I feel like in the second part of her song, you can still see some hints of skepticism and belief that she is this absurd figure, a 90-year-old woman with a baby. And she said, who would have uttered, in verse 7, who would have uttered to Abraham, Sarah, a suckling son? For I have borne a son in his old age. This could be a joyful song that she offers up here, finally being given a son, finally having this laughter. Or she could, too, be self-conscious. I myself like seeing this as a laughter of joy. But, maybe in the back of your mind, you can see some skepticism could be there, And verse 8 says, "And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. And she said to Abraham, Drive out the slave girl and her son, for the slave girl's son shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac." So now we see the old rivalry come back, We've got this party, this feast for Isaac as he's growing up, and, Ishmael's there. She doesn't call him by name, which is probably on purpose, It happens a couple times where she just says, Hagar's son over there. Everybody knows people who speak like that.
I mean, it's probably worse for her now that she has her own child.
Could be.
What's the time frame from Hagar having, what's the age difference? Many years.
I think he
would
was
assume.
13 and then probably 15 or 16 by the time he was weaned, I would say.
You're saying how old is Ishmael to Isaac? That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a very good, let's say he's 10 years older. I really don't know.
I think
That's a
it
good
said
question.
13. That's what I was saying.
Oh, 13?
I think it
Okay,
was
13's good.
13 something. I don't know.
That's a very good question.
When he was,
Born.
okay.
I don't know.
13.
I do remember reading something.
So
just a
was
minute
Sarah
ago.
still at the age of she was 90?
She
so
was
still at
old when the Hagar plan
67
happened.
Or 77, she was still planning on getting pregnant?
Well, I guess she's given up at that point. I feel like the Hagar plan was instituted because she gives up.
Okay.
No, there's no way I can do it. I'm 77.
Right.
Let's just say. That's good. And you can see Ishmael, he's having a good time. He's at the party, just his presence,
What's our lesson out of here? Wait on God? Or what? I mean, seriously.
That's possible.
They didn't. They gave up.
Yeah.
Ooh, they gave up for sure. Yeah. And so here with him laughing, that key word that jumps out in there is laughing. Ishmael is laughing. One note here is this is the Hebrew word metashak, which means something more like mocking or joking. Maybe your translation might even say mocking. Is he mocking us? Is she worried that Ishmael could inherit too much, or is she protecting her son Isaac? And then in 11 it says, "And the thing seemed evil in Abraham's eyes because of his son. And God said to Abraham, Let it not seem evil in your eyes on account of the lad and on account of your slave girl. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her voice. but through Isaac shall your seed be acclaimed. But the slave girl's son too I will make a nation, for he is your seed. So God is letting Abraham know that Ishmael will be taken care of, and that Sarah is in the right here. Listen to her, fear not. Let Sarah cut her loose, but have faith in me. All these promises are going to come to pass. He continually says that the whole time. In 14 it says, and Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulder. And he gave her the child and sent her away. And she went wandering through the wilderness of Beersheba. Beersheba, yeah, okay. And one thing that we probably won't have enough time to go into, but there are parallels here as to what we're going to talk about next week. In chapter 22, the binding of Isaac. He sets Ishmael off on his way, and he does it early in the morning. We'll see the same thing next week in Isaac's story. And then in 15, and when the water in the skin was gone, she flung the child under one of the bushes and went off and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, for she thought, let me not see when the child dies. So they're all out of water, and she doesn't want to see her son die. And in verse 17, and she sat at a distance and raised her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and God's messenger called out from the heavens and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the lad's voice where he is. Rise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for a great nation I will make of him. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the lad to drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew up and dwelled in the wilderness. So there's so many details and things going on here. But it'll all be very important next week, because we're gonna kind of go through that as we move into Isaac's story. But there's very many similarities. The first thing is there's this fear of death. Hagar weeps, and the child cries out, and this is when God hears. It reminds me of the moment when Cain murders Abel, and it says, the blood cries out from the soil to me. God hears those who cry out to him. He hears those who have faith and cry out to him. He hears those who are suffering. He told Hagar, return to Sarah. I have heard your suffering. God hears the suffering and responds. God opens her eyes, and she saw the water. She sees the water that was there, not God makes the water appear. I think that's important, and it also parallels Isaac's story as well. She opens her eyes and sees the water. He reminds her of the promises to come, or the promise to come, and she opens her eyes. And guess what can't happen if the child's dead? Then they can't make it into a great nation. Hagar had not given up hope in her son to become a great nation, and in God's promise. But the moment the angel speaks out and reminds her of the promise, of the blessing to come, to become a great nation, that's when her eyes are opened. And of course, there must be water here. Of course, there must be a way to live, because God has promised that he would become a great nation. He cannot die in this moment. God hears the suffering. And does that mean that all will be well? No. But God hears the suffering and reminds her of the promise to come. And we want to keep that in mind as we go into next week. And if you want to read chapter 22 next week, or in preparation for next week, that's the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. It is one of the most commented on stories in Genesis, or in the whole Bible to some degree. You will have many people picking it apart in all kinds of different ways. But we see a lot of the same images, like one more time, the fear of the death of the child who's been given a great promise, great blessing to become a great nation, the voice of God coming to the father who hears the death of his child and yet simultaneously knows the blessings to come. And that's what we're going to look at next time is Abraham and Isaac. So, Christy asked, what's the moral of today's story? I don't know. Today's we're just digging in deeper. I don't really know if I have a moral, no devotion time. But anyway, I feel like there's so many things, so many details that we don't have enough time to pull out, in the sanctuary, because we have other focuses on those texts, And I also love the idea that there's many different ways of interpreting, whether it's skeptical or joyful, or whose perspective is right, who's wrong. And we're all kind of in the same boat as we go out and we make our own decisions, just like Sarah or Hagar herself, So, all right, we will pick up there next week. But does anybody have any prayer requests or anything happy to talk about? Praise report? No?
Well, my mom got a job, so there's praise.
There you go.
She hasn't had a paycheck in a long, long time,
Really?
so
Mm-hmm.
it's temporary, but it's something.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
We have a family member that was in a really bad car wreck last week, so we always remember, right now, we don't really know what, because she has so much swelling in her brain, we don't know if there's any activity there, so probably gonna be finding out something in the next day or so. But however it's gonna end, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Not very good, but so I just remember.
All right. Well, we'll have a quick prayer before we head out. Dear Lord, we just want to thank you so much for opening your word to us this morning. We enjoy the time that we have that we've set aside to gather together and to learn more about the stories that you've given us. We ask that you continue to bless our families, continue to help us grow as a church family even. We ask that you continue to bless us through the week and watch over our service this morning and our worship time. That's in your name we pray. Amen.
Tara, it says that Ishmael was circumcised when he was 13 and Abraham was 99, so he was 100 when Isaac was born, so probably 14 years.
Okay.
Ooh, there you go.
Years.
There you go.
I knew I had read it
Yeah.
No, right.
But
No,
then
yeah.
it makes
Yeah.
him seem like he's
He's changed his name.
a boy. I mean, not that 15 is
Yeah,
not a
no,
boy,
you're right. You're right.
but
It is
not that
Abram,
she's put
and
him in
I
the
just
bush
simplified
because she doesn't want him to
Abram
die. It seems
and
like
Sarai
Moses
into
that
Abraham
put
and Sarah,
him
just to
weeds in a
What?
basket.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, he
that's
kind
how
of
I think
changes
of
them.
it. I don't know.
That's the way I always understand when people have
But
a
he
name
was
change in the
older.
Bible. It's because they've kind of changed like inside to some degree. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. No. So before he's Abram and he's kind of rough and he makes his own
Because it
decisions.
was
Once he's
after Isaac
Abraham,
was
I think the Ham part means
And, I mean,
father
I
of.
would
I think that's what that
to
means.
maybe
So then
have a
he's
feast
the
for-
father of all these people. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's why his name changed. That's why. That's a good question. But see, like, I had it in my notes earlier. It's like Abram, and I'm like, man, I'm not gonna say Abram, and then here I'm gonna stumble and say Abraham. So I just said Abraham every single time.
I was looking at them going, wow, but that
Yeah.
makes sense if the hand part means father.
That's what it means. But the Sarah part, when it adds the H, I don't know if that means mother. I don't know. But he definitely changes their names for them. It's not their own choice, for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Abraham.
Yeah. No, God changes their name. Yeah. He says from this point on you're gonna be called Abraham.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is.
So that's in between the one we read?
Yeah, I just
Okay.
skipped over a lot.
That's fine.
Abraham goes off and does all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of interactions with other people. I was just focused on the other part.
Steve, wait, which one?
Yeah,
What
good one
one?
and bad one.
Yeah, one guy doing like the woodwork and the windows, but then, William does the other things here. Like William goes through that, he does the other things, line and stuff in. Oh, is she?
Okay, thank you.
And,
I don't know what happened to the live thing here.
It was still on there.
Was it still going? Oh, it was like black screen.